Welcome back to Season 3 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, lifelong helper, nonprofit founder, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for a decade with my blog, and I'm so excited that we're now sharing these inspiring conversations on our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Today, our guest is Brian Butler, founder of the nonprofit Foster the Mind. Join us as Brian shares his incredible story of depression, struggles with mental health, and suicidal thoughts, and his path forward, what saved him, and how he is now using that to save hundreds of students and children struggling with the same problems. It's a beautiful story. You're not going to want to miss this. I am so excited to have Brian Butler here today from Foster the Mind, an incredible nonprofit that really focuses on mental health. And we're going to learn from Brian today about the amazing work that he's doing to serve so many in such need right now of his services and incredible work. So welcome, Brian. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me on, Heidi. I appreciate it.
It is really great to be here. I always meet people, as I was saying, in the most unexpected ways. And in full disclosure, Brian's wife and I were at a meeting together, and she was sharing very proudly about the work that Brian was doing. I said, "Oh, Brian started a nonprofit. I need to talk to him for Charity Matters." So I'm really excited that this actually came to fruition and we're having this conversation, and especially about mental health, which, if anything, is on the forefront of all of our minds these days. I definitely think it's mental health. So why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about what Foster the Mind does?
Kids in the foster care system are diagnosed with PTSD twice as much as veterans, twice as much as those in the military. So primarily we're focusing on abused and foster kid population. That's my passion. Which surprisingly impacts more people than you would care to know. People that you don't even know are in the foster care system have trauma and unresolved trauma. And so, which creates a lot of mental health issues, and it's typically not really addressed or focused on. So by the time you get to a therapist or someone, you're given all kinds of diagnoses like generalized anxiety disorder and all these different disorders. But the reality of it is usually the root cause of that is some sort of, not always, but oftentimes, or paired with some sort of trauma, whether it be in childhood or later in life. But a lot of what I see is those who have suffered childhood trauma and just buried it. And the brain does a pretty good job of trying to bury it and push it back. And so over time, it begins to fester. And so they're oftentimes not addressing the original issue that caused the current level of mental health function.
Well, and you can't even think of foster care, which once upon a time, our country got rid of the word orphanage and changed it to foster care in the 50s, I believe, that without, of course, there's trauma. If you are a child that doesn't have a family or has been moved in multiple families or has had to be removed from your family, I mean, they go hand in hand, right? They just go hand in hand, and it's absolutely tragic. But these kids are beautiful kids, and you're giving them a chance to help them. So, when you're a little boy and someone says, when you grow up, I want to be this, nonprofit founder usually isn't the top of the list. Usually it's, when I'm little, I want to be, president or fireman or policeman or whatever it is.
Or a marine biologist.
Okay,
and then I want to be an architect. Yeah.
Okay. So, it's interesting to me and fascinating, I think, to everyone, the path that we all go on that leads us to serve and leads us to the work that we end up doing. But I'm curious how you go from marine biologist or architect to what is the path that led you here? Because something happens along your path that leads you to this. And so I'd love to hear kind of the backstory of your with mental health, and what led you to this incredible work?
I grew up in a very chaotic home. My father, I used to call, he didn't drink. We were big teetotalers, Southern Baptist Church, hardcore, you know. And so I grew up in an environment where I walked on eggshells all the time because my father would get so angry all the time, and it was very erratic. And so, but it was extra confusing because it was a lot of mixed messages, because my dad would always say, "I love you," and hug me and things. But the other side of the coin is he would lose it all the time, and he never knew what he would lose it about. So my mom and my sister and I, we lied all the time. We basically create our own way of coping by avoiding the truth, by working around my dad, and basically everything in the household revolved around his mood at the time. So, but and if you
so hard,
right? But what happens is you start to feel like it's your fault, because when my dad would lose it over things that I did or said,
you're walking in a minefield every day, and you don't know what you're going to hit, and you don't know what's going to set it off, and you feel like if you step on it, it's your fault the minefield went off.
Exactly. And then you start to feel like, as a child, what happens is the roles reversed. So now his moods are what the child have to attend to. So your needs don't get met, and then he's reversed the roles by doing that. And so I'm taking care of him. I'm trying to say the right things, do the right things. And then when he loses it, which he blamed us all the time for most things. And so it's our fault that he's angry. It's our fault. And so you hear that long enough, you start to believe it. As a child, especially, you don't really have the inside of the clarity to realize that he's dysfunctional. And so
something's wrong.
Right. And my mom really didn't have the strength. Like, there's a couple of times that we were going to leave. I remember carrying suitcases out to the car when we were going to leave him. And I was young, so I don't remember why we didn't. I think my mom was just too afraid. It also was during a time where talking about abuse and trauma and mental health and stuff was not really on the forefront of most people's minds. You just kind of dealt with it yourself. Yeah. And so it was very difficult too, because my dad would lose it on the way to church, and then we have to all act nice and smile. And my dad was a deacon and taught Sunday school. And I remember sometimes kids saying, because my dad joked around a lot, he's got a great personality, and I'm grateful to him for that. But so people would be like, it must be great to live at your house. It must be fun all the time. Oh yeah.
Not so much. Yeah.
So
when did you kind of realize that as a young adult that maybe, this had kind of processed all of this, or when did it start rearing its head? Because it does.
Well, it was a part of me all the time. My mood swings, struggle with relationship, connecting. I don't know if you know much about attachment disorders, but when you have an environment like that, when you don't have a secure attachment, then so mine, there's 4 different types of attachment: secure, anxious, avoidant, and anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, which is what I had. Of course, I didn't know that. So I would get close to somebody, then I would push them away, because in my mind, they're called deactivating strategies that your brain does to keep you safe. So if someone starts to get close to me, I push them away because I don't trust people.
Right.
Yeah.
They could hurt you.
So I think of some times when I was in college, I would just tell girls. I remember a specific girl I really liked, and I was like, I just feel really uncomfortable. Of course, she just thought it was just a line and I just made it up, and it wasn't. I was being honest. I feel uncomfortable. I don't know what this is.
Right.
So,
but you knew, you knew something was, you knew somehow things weren't okay, but you didn't know exactly. So when you're growing up, no one knows anyways. We're all figuring it out. So none of us know. Everything's confusing when you're growing up.
So in graduate school, one of my professors, talked about that we minister out of who we are. And so I had to write a paper. It was my freshman year in graduate school. And so after he read it, he was like, this is really dark. So he wanted me to go see a therapist. And so I did. I'm like, okay. So I went and saw a therapist and was given the diagnosis of major depressive disorder, which is why, again, I'm going to jump around here, but which is why I really like what I do. Because when you combine, so the DSM is really not based on the brain. It's based on symptom clusters, right? So someone could be struck in the head with a baseball bat. And if they didn't share that information later on in life, if they didn't have a big scar and their brain healed and they went to go see a clinician, they might diagnose them with ADHD. Because when you have a head injury to the prefrontal cortex, then not staying on task, struggling with focus, memory, then they might say, oh, ADHD. But what I like about what I do is we use electroencephalograms and we are able to record the activity of the brain. And it's not diagnostic of itself, but it's a really good tool to look at what they're presenting with and then do a really good job of doing an interview, a very thorough interview. I used to say that, and because I kind of do it that way, my obsessive assessment.
Was there a moment when you connected the dots that you needed to take? Because while these things are painful and traumatic and horrible that happened to you, they ultimately are your gifts. They are the things that they are your gifts, and your pain is your gift. Believe it or not, as horrible as it is, it's your gift. And now you're giving that gift to so many children in need. So how did you connect the two? Obviously, the professor says you need to get help. You say, okay, I'm going to do this. But when did Foster the Mind? When did all the pieces come together? Was there a moment?
I volunteered at church. I worked with a lot of youth. But I always connected with the kids who really struggled. I always wanted to help.
Because they were you, because you were them and you get them. You walk the walk with them. Yes. And you can really only, I don't say you can't help someone you don't walk the walk with, but if you've walked a walk with someone that you have already done, it's a lot easier to help someone. And they know that and they trust you and you know what they're going through.
But I also realize now, later on in life, you realize that you're trying to find some meaning. So in saving them, you're giving yourself meaning, because I always felt worthless, that my dad hated me and I was actually a loser. And that was basically one of the things that I told myself all the time, is I'm a loser. And as a person who struggled with because I had ADHD, but trauma further makes it worse.
Right.
It just exacerbates it. So
everything.
I was intelligent, but I was struggling to get work done. Of course, back then, no one knew what it was. And so I just basically beat myself up more and more. And I work with a lot of ADHD individuals. My wife is the one that we wouldn't even have the nonprofit if it wasn't for her, because she's the linear. So I remember when we were first dating, like I would just come up with all these ideas, which is why she's the one that gave me the title Chief Passion Officer. She just made it up because
but that's so perfect. It's what every nonprofit founder should be, with the title they should be going by. I think it is perfect.
So I live in the future. So anytime we have a board meeting or a meeting, I'm never going to tell you something that we have to do today, like a step. I'm going to tell you where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And my wife is like, okay, great. Let's talk about
how many years ago did you decide to start Foster the Mind?
So after those 20 years, right? So I spent those 20 years, and I was in graduate school studying psychology. And at that time, this was after a lot of crazy stuff. I went to jail a few times, quit school and played in a band for a while. And then one of my really good friends that was in the band with me, we went up to Cape Cod in Maryland, which is where they live. And we spent a summer there, but I really connected with his mom. Like for some reason, we just really bonded and I call her my adopted mom, even though my mom was alive. Right. But she was just she's the one that Sorry.
That's all right. We all have those angels in our lives that come in.
It's been a very emotional day yesterday and today. So
yeah. Well, with what you're doing and what you're dealing with, rescuing children out of abusive foster care situations, I would think every day for you, Brian, is an emotional day. But I think there's nothing wrong with being emotional, and you should be proud of lucky that you have an angel like that
yes.
that came in. And
she basically created the model that I follow today. So I don't like Band-Aids. And I think that's most of what the mental health system provides. Not all. And so I'm not cutting down anyone, but I don't like Band-Aids because that's mostly what I was given for 20 years. So, but I was in graduate school. After I'd met her, we played in the band, and then we broke up, and I fell apart, went to jail a couple of times. So, but I she was the one that paid for me to go back to graduate school. First I was going to be a web designer. She paid for that. She paid for me to go to counseling and for medication. And then at the time I thought I was diagnosed with bipolar, which I do not have. But sorry, I'm trying to put this all together, but
that's okay.
But I was in graduate school studying psychology, which she paid for.
Right.
And so at the time I was diagnosed with bipolar. And so I tried to kill myself again. I put a 357 in my mouth and was punching my head, screaming, do it, just do it. Because I've always hated my guts. I hated who I was. And so I didn't do it because I knew my nephews, it would impact them greatly, and I loved them desperately. So the next week I went to my professor, and I said, not my professor, but the one who oversaw the counseling department. And I was like, look, I am doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm currently diagnosed with bipolar. I'm taking all the meds. I'm exercising. I'm praying. I'm going to church. I mean, I'm doing it all. There's got to be something else because this is not working, and I'm going to kill myself because I'm tired of living in pain. So he said, well, there's a guy who came through here and has a clinic in Burleson, which is now where I live, and I actually worked at that clinic. But so I started going there and doing neurofeedback, which is more popular in Europe and Canada. So at the time I was on 7 different medications, which again, I'm not anti-med. For a while I was, but I know the brain's too complicated. So I have clients who are on meds and I do neurofeedback, and we use a combination.
So explain what neurofeedback is, people that don't know.
So neurofeedback is a operant conditioning model. So we do a 19-channel electroencephalogram, just the way like a neurologist would. Sometimes neurologists do more. But neurologists are looking for oftentimes seizure activity, traumatic brain injury. But we use it in a different way. It was a very cool thing. When my very first neurofeedback conference, I met a neurologist, and I was talking to him, and he's like, I was so excited to find out that my only tools are not meds or surgery, that you can actually rewire the brain. So we do an electroencephalogram, and then we have a lot of different ways of looking at it, but we're looking for deficiency and excesses in certain waveforms because I'll send you an image, because the brain creates delta, alpha, theta, beta, and gamma. And so those are the different 5 brain waves it does, but each one plays a specific role. And it's really important to know where they are and what part of the brain is involved. And so, like, for instance, with someone who has ADHD, there's different types, there's different phenotypes, but someone who has excess alpha. Alpha is an idling state. It's kind of like when your car engine's running, but it's not in drive. So you don't really want that excessive alpha when somebody's trying to get something done. It's called alpha ADD because they can't get in gear to get something done. And so what we do is we train the brain to work better. So we'll ramp up the prefrontal cortex or wherever. So
you had this done yourself, and you went from being suicidal to having neurofeedback. And what happened? How did it change you?
It took me about 1.5 years. So, and I'll send you, it's really cool. I've got this slide that shows, because we tracked all my symptoms for like 2 years. It's really cool. So you can watch sleep.
You can see in your brain how it's changing. Right.
Well, this is basically more of just a snapshot. But yes, we would do brain maps as we continue to train, because it's called long-term potentiation. So when you train long enough and the brain starts to realize, the brain really doesn't like to use a lot of energy. So once it's been hardwired a certain way, it holds it. Especially if there's been trauma, it's trying to protect you. But as you start to rewire it, it fights it. And plus it takes a lot of energy to rewire it. But as you do that, it's kind of cool, because as the brain improves, then like for me, I was on 7 different meds and I got off all of them.
You have this done. And then Amanda says, you need to go and help other people. Or how did this happen?
Well, once I finished, it's about a 3-year journey. So I did all the training and I got so much better. But then there's we work off the biopsychosocial, spiritual, and I add the financial to it, a model of a person. So to really get them to a place of balance and health, then you have to focus on all those different areas. So, but the the very first part is the brain and the body. So when I got off all those medications, but then I just continued to work on myself. I went and did the cool thing about, well, just so you know, neurofeedback is the reason why it's difficult to just send somebody to do neurofeedback is because there's a lot of different types. There's a lot of proprietary systems. But in my journey, I've done pretty much all of them.
Right.
So when I'm treating someone, I kind of know, like, hey, we can do this or this, and here's another option. But after I got much better, where I was treated, he offered me a job to come back and work at the clinic that I've been treated.
Great.
So again, I was still trying to I felt so much better. I slept better. I didn't have such mood swings. I was starting to feel good about myself. I was in a much better balanced place, but now I've got to find what's my life purpose, right?
Right. Well, don't we all? We're all
right.
I think there's a lot of us looking for that.
Right. So I moved to Memphis. I was there for a year with my really good friend, Pete, it was his mom who is paid for everything and helped me get back on my feet. And so he offered me a job. So I moved from Memphis back to Burleson, and I worked at a foster home. So a buddy of mine, there was a place. So, and one of the kids who I built a relationship with works for me now.
Great.
It's really cool. And so after working at the private clinic for about 4 years, I got tired of them because they would give me the worst of the worst because I liked it. I like a challenge. And so most of the clinicians would listen, why don't we just
and so when you say they would give you the worst of the worst, like we still haven't gotten to how we even started the nonprofit, like when you had the epiphany. But when you're working at the foster care, you're saying when you were at the foster care home, they would give you the worst kids.
No, when I was at the private clinic,
they would give you the worst. Okay.
The other clinicians would work with kids for a while. Like, let's just give it to Brian because I like the challenge. I also have a crazy story, and I'm also very excited. And so I liked working with kids, and I liked a challenge. So after a while, though, they would bring, like, I got to work with foster kids or adopted kids.
Right.
And so they come to the table with all kinds of issues. And so I would train them, but it's very expensive. The equipment's very expensive. The training's very expensive. So it's usually cost prohibitive for most people who really need it.
Right.
So I was really getting tired of people coming and bringing their adopted kid or whoever needed help, and they'd have to just quit before we reached our goals because they couldn't afford it. Because it's thousands of dollars.
Right.
So I come from a ministry background where we just serve and for free.
You just give and give, right.
So I hated that anyway. So when I got married, my wife knew about this vision. She said, okay, let's just do it. And so she helped me put it together. She helped me get the equipment. She helped me, put everything together. And so that I could start it. And then for like the first year and a half, it was slow going.
And then, what year did you guys start Foster the Mind? What year did you start?
So this is 2022. So 2018.
And then how are you getting your kids? Like, how does it work where someone comes to you? How do foster care have you on speed dial, the local foster care?
Well, when I left the clinic, there was 2 kids that I knew I had to stay in touch with. Most everybody else, so that's the big thing in mental health. When you're working with clients, you have to make sure there's continuum of care and they get taken care of.
Right.
So it just was miraculous the way it worked. It's like everybody had kind of come to a head where they're better, they're moving on. I could transfer to the clinicians, but there was 2 kids that I knew because we connected and bonded. So I knew that I was going to have to keep working with them. And so I eventually was able to come back and start working with that kid. And then I had a good friend who's the board president. He knew some people who had a mental health clinic. And so that's where he practiced out the back part of their clinic. And so the cool thing is they get kids who they don't know what to do with, or it's beyond their scope, and they give them to me.
Oh, that's great.
So for instance, the recent one has Tourette's, like really severe Tourette's, like screaming, "F you, I'm so sorry." Just this cute little teenage girl, I'll smash your head with a baseball bat. I'm so sorry. She would just always be apologizing. She'd flip you off. She'd be screaming. And she could not control it. And so she spent 9 years with neurologists and psychiatrists, and so no relief. But in my field, working with tics is not uncommon. Right. So it's kind of frustrating because there's so many people that could be helped. And so right now she doesn't have any physical or vocal tics. She's playing the guitar. She's in drama. She's got a boyfriend. And she's thriving. It took us a while. And so it's really kind of cool is that every time. And so we did a brain map and we do source localization to find where those tics are. And then we just start training. And as the brain heals, it was cool because every time you walk her back from the front office, little less tics, little less making noise, little less saying things. And it just sort of eventually just dissipated.
Well, the brain creates these new superhighways, once it goes down a path.
Right.
And I always tell this to the kids, it takes whatever, 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm not talking with using the biofeedback, but if you decide I'm not going to have a Diet Coke every day and you decide you're going to walk to the counter and get a glass of water and you do that over and over and over for 8 weeks, that the path in your brain is bigger to get the water than the Diet Coke, and the brain's amazing that way. And I think that it's fascinating that more people aren't doing what you're doing. Well, so you started a nonprofit. You've already been through, Brian, your own personal challenges have been extraordinary up until this point. You decided to start the nonprofit in 2018 and help kids. But what challenges have you had just running a business that helps people, and not only helps people, but, I think sometimes being a keeper of the pain and seeing how much pain is out in the world and not being a sponge and letting it pass through you is not an easy thing. My aunt worked with, she was the head of the Catholic Church and worked with the head psychologist, children that were abused, victims. And she said that her biggest challenge was being a keeper of the pain, but letting the pain, trying to find a way for it to pass through her and not to hold on to it, to not be the sponge, but to let the water flow through. And so I think about how many challenges in your work. That's the first thing. I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think about the level of pain you see every day in humanity. But then I think of all the joy you do. So share some of the challenges that you have in doing this work.
So when I said I hate Band-Aids, and I'm basically living out for helping other people the same way that Mrs. Anderson helped me. So I'll give you an example. Okay. So she's been adopted, but she had lots of abuse. And so we started training her. We really calmed down her anxiety. And so kind of our model is we calm the brain down and then I'll process trauma. Like you've probably heard of EMDR, but I do EMDR on steroids because I use called alternating current stimulation. It's just a very light stimulation and a pulse electromagnetic field therapy. And so it basically forces the right and left hemisphere to alternate while you're telling a story. And what that does is it doesn't erase the memory, but it starts to remove the emotional impact that specific memory has. It's really powerful. I actually carried all my equipment up to my therapist's office and hooked the machine up while I was telling all my past and all my trauma because it's just. And so for this one girl, we've done that. And so she had lots of social anxiety, lots of trauma. And so she's so much calmer now. She's more focused, getting schoolwork done. But what I try to do is find out what they're interested in so I can get them to be invested in themselves and start to realize what they're capable of. And so she's a brilliant artist. So I paid for her and let her have Adobe Suite. She wanted to do podcasts, or she wanted to do animation. So got her a recorder. So we basically give and so she's done 2 or 3 now. I had a kid who we've been training for a while. And so he had an interest in guitar, bought him guitar. He has ongoing guitar lessons that I pay for. Just anything that I think, because it's not just about training their brain and getting them better. You have to also look at the environment they're in, give the family support. I'm going to be paying for, there's a good friend of mine, a colleague. She has a organization that goes into homes and she reviews them, kind of looks at the environment,
right,
talks about what they're struggling with and helps them kind of organize and set up for success. And so I'm going to pay for them to go out to this kid's home. Whatever I feel like they need, whatever crops up. And that's kind of what I want to do. Like my motto would be like, I don't know really how to say it, but to be able to walk along these kids and that's why I want to eventually pay them very well, because most organizations that are nonprofit don't pay well. And in this field, it's really important. And the reason why, because it takes a toll. So most people quit. It's
emotionally, I mean, the work you're doing specifically is emotionally really challenging. When you're seeing a child that's suffering, that's had trauma, that's being removed from foster care, that's been through abuse, or, the whole host of things, and you're treating them or dealing with them, to see that pain day in and day out is challenging. But then there is a flip side, because you do have happy endings. You do have successes.
Yes, we do have successes, which is really, really exciting. And it's kind of cool because my two techs it's been fun to watch them. They're pretty young to get to be a part of them, and them giving us cards on Christmas. Thanks for changing my son's life, my daughter's life. And so when I say daughter, lots of them have been adopted. Most of the kids I work with, but then I also work with a lot of adults who've had childhood trauma. And
so so if they're adopted but they're acting up or they're having crazy behavior, and their adopted family, their parents have struggled to find, they've taken them to psychologists, psychiatrists. Are you like the last stop for
oftentimes people find neurofeedback, usually like me, find it as a last resort because it's not widely known. It's very expensive. Insurance doesn't pay for it. And so, yes, oftentimes, and there's a lack of understanding in the mental health field of trauma and the impact it has and how much it really, and so clients that I have now who are older, so it's not uncommon for them to have fibromyalgia or immune disorders or arthritis, and there's a book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. And so that's actually what happens, is there is a connection between the mind and the body. And so you see these people and they have just a slew of issues because of their childhood trauma that's never been flushed, never been addressed. They've gone to psychiatrists, they've been given some medication, but it is a Band-Aid. I hate Band-Aids. And so that's why I like it, because the nonprofit model, I can work with clients for years. I can have a kid come in. I've got a client now who's 10. So when he's 17 and come up with some other issues dressing, I want him to come, because my dream is to have this clinic and a school and a foster home and an adoption.
You asked the question. You answered the question before I could ask it.
Yes.
Because the question is, what is your dream? I mean, you're a baby, 2018. You're a baby in the nonprofit world. You're only a couple of years old, but it doesn't mean you can't. Everything starts, Home Depot started as a mom and pop hardware store. Everything starts small. Every nonprofit starts with a person and an idea. It doesn't start huge. So So I cut you off, but I'm going to ask you so you can tell me your answer because I know you know.
Okay.
But what is your dream for Foster the Mind? But your dream is to create what?
Create a home, a campus that has mental health treatment, that has an art studio, because it has a adoption agency, a foster care place. For Texas is one of the few places when you turn 18 and you're a foster kid that they no longer support you or help you.
California doesn't either.
There's lots of there's a lot of people who are homeless and struggle, and even so I want to have also a place where they can teach welding and just everything else that might be helpful for someone who isn't going to go to school and go to college.
Right.
And I want to have my own. I was a big brother when I was in college, but it's not a great organization. It's not well organized. They don't have enough people. So I'm going to create my own. But those people are going to be trained in trauma treatment. Because most of my stuff, like I go to homes, I have mobile equipment. And so I just go to homes and treat them. And then they do come to the clinic. But I want to be able to have all these mobile trauma therapists who are also befriending and being a big brother, big sister to all these kids who need help.
Well, and I think that that's the beauty of you hope the nonprofit system, because if you're doing it correctly, and obviously you have, because you have people that you have helped that are working for you, and the pay it forward model works, and it provides purpose, it provides a path, it provides clarity. And when you are given something and you want to help the next person along, I mean, that's the way it works. And most of the nonprofit founders I've interviewed are people that have had something happen to them, whether it's cancer, rape, whatever, and they're starting the organization just so it doesn't happen to one person. That's their whole impetus is. And on the flip side is when they light the torch and inspire someone with what they did proactively to help someone, that person wants to take the torch and light another. Exactly. And you are the torch, Brian, whether you like it or not, you're the torch. You're the torch. And so having mentors and having big brothers and having these kids that you're helping learn to give back to other people is a gift. That spreads the light. That spreads the goodness. That spreads the joy.
Well, and I'm fighting. Now I'm realizing that CPS, how bad it is. Judges. I mean, I'm going
Child
to
Protective Services.
Child Protective Services. I'm going to court with some clients. I'm seeing how jaded and just the whole system. So now I realize I've got a bigger battle than I realized. That's okay. But
that the CDC has said, and this is from Foster the Mind's website, $2 trillion is the economic fallout of mental health. $2 trillion. So for us to be proactive and investing or supporting organizations like Foster the Mind is a smart business decision. Not only is it emotionally and spiritually a brilliant thing to do, but it's a smart business decision.
I've got people that've gone back to work, pursuing careers, going back to school when they were going to file for disability. Some of them have said, I'm just going to file for disability because I can't function because I'm having panic attacks all day.
Well, I think the hardest thing too, and I think going back to challenges of nonprofits, is we wear a lot of hats. We wear a lot of hats. We run program, we fundraise, we market, we answer the phone, we do everything. I mean, I run a nonprofit that serves 3,000 kids, and we have 2.5 employees, myself and 1.5 other. And cool. and it is cool. And we train the trainer. You know, our high school kids teach, our college kids teach our high school kids teach our middle school kids, and we kind of have this waterfall of leadership that we teach. But we wear a lot of hats, and trying to decide what hat to wear, what day, and to be proactive and not reactive is very challenging. And when you're dealing with family crisis situations that will interrupt the most organized, scheduled, best of plans for the day, it doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of challenges just with that in itself. And there's challenges just personally with having to manage trauma all the time.
Well, and then to have enough to come home to my wife and stepsons and be able to give to them. So
Yeah.
it's a learning process. I'm getting much better at it. And I try to, I like to mountain bike. I spend a lot of time outdoors.
That's
Anyway, I'm going to be riding in the Hotter Than Hell this summer. So I wanted to do all those events to raise money too and kind of get some exposure for Foster Mind. But
I think that's brilliant. I think that's so great. So this has been a long, I mean, it's been you've had a long journey, not saying that you're old, but the life experience that you have lived has been rich and deep and varied. And there's got to be a lot of lessons that have come with all that you have been through and all that you see. So share with us some of the things that you've learned just during this journey.
I think most of all, and the really most exciting thing about all this is the neuroplasticity of the brain. That no matter what you've experienced, no matter what you've been through, that the brain can be rewired, can be changed so that they become a strength as opposed to a downfall. And so that's been my personal experience. And that's what happens so when a client comes to me and they've lived in chronic fight or flight, and they're having panic attacks all day long, every day, and I'm telling them my own story, my own journey, I can see, that's sort of my gift, I guess part of my gift, maybe I'm seeing my own self, but I can see, 6 months from now, I can see 3 months from now, I can see where I think they should be.
Right.
And so, like
do they see it? Do they see it?
No, I didn't see it. When I started doing neurofeedback, I was like, this is not going to work. It's not going to work.
But when you share with a client, this is where you're going to be, because I know where you're going to be. Do they believe you? Do they see? Can they see it? No.
No, but I'm asking them, because I share my story. I'm asking them to trust me. Don't trust yourself because you're not there yet. But I'm asking you to trust me, and you keep coming. And so I've got 3 clients now who they were having panic attacks all day long, and you can see it in the brain. You can see in the brain waves when they're recording. And so as we've trained, so much fun, because now they can have a conversation without having a panic attack. And it's just it's very miraculous, and it feels very surreal oftentimes, even though it's been kind of my story just of change. And then we see lots of clients, but still every time it's still amazing to me to see that happen.
People hear that you had pain and suffering and darkness, but you came through it, and look at what you're doing to help other people. And that's the hope that people need. They need to hear stories like yours, that there is a way through. It's not easy, but there's a way through.
Well, yeah, you're right. So everybody that I see, my vision is, my desire is for them not to suffer the way I suffered.
See,
and for them to find their way faster, which is what we're doing.
Brian, this is so good. This is so good. So tell me how you think you've changed. I mean, obviously, from afraid, suicidal, depressed, to this guy whose smile is really ginormous when you talk about your work and the lives you're changing. You've obviously changed in incredible ways. How do you think you've changed?
So what's been cool about all my journey of healing, especially with Amanda, because she's been absolutely amazing for me. She has held me while I've wept forever, because I've never been married before, because it wasn't safe. Right. And so I just continue to feel more like adult. I'm feeling more like my emotional age and my real age are starting to get closer.
Come together.
They're coming
I'm
together.
trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to be the kid.
Right.
You're trying to be the adult, and I'm trying to be younger.
Right. So, and then also just feeling a sense of peace about that. And my wife's big in talking about seasons, like things happen in seasons. So I really hang on to that a lot. And that even
She's
when I can't help
wise.
some right now, is that I know that something will happen and I'll continue to be able to help them. Like, so if there's a hiccup in their treatment or something else happens in the family, because of my own story, I keep reminding myself of the whole seasons thing. And secondly, that to be cautious with my expectations, not that I change them as far as people getting better, but that I'm not expecting it to happen overnight and reminding myself how long it took me to get here. So I guess
being married to an outcome and versus being just doing what you can do.
Yeah. And I really, the biggest thing too is because I do live in the future and where I want to be, learning to enjoy the present moment. And I'm grateful to actually have a family. I never thought I would be a part of a family. So I really enjoy the connectedness and how grounded I am. And so now that I've started the nonprofit, so my vision has been able to change. So now I get to see clients plugged into a relationship, into a family on the other side of all the stuff that they dealt with because I did it. So it's right. I get to keep sharing part of who I am and part of my story with clients and then helping them realize the same thing. But they're the ones doing the work, not me. I get to be around for part of it and I try to facilitate and guide them, but they're the ones doing the really heavy lifting.
I think that you've done a lot of heavy lifting, and I think it's a lot of heavy lifting. And I have to say, your journey is remarkable, and what you're doing to give back to so many people is just such a gift, and it's so desperately needed. And just the educating you're doing with everyone listening to learn about this as an option and to learn about things that people don't even know exist. I just think I'm just so impressed. But before we wrap it up, I need to know where we can support you, where we can donate, where we can find out how to reach out. We know you're in Texas, but where can we send money? Where can we send friends? Give us all that information.
So fosterthemind.org. So FOSTERTHEMIND.org. And so there is actually a link on there to donate. And
are you on social media? Are you on Facebook and Instagram?
Well, once we get all this stuff put together, then we're going to be on Facebook and Instagram. We've signed to do a crowdfund. So we're going to really hit it hard. And I'm going to go out and start sharing and meeting everyone that I can.
I think that that's fantastic. Well, I hope that everyone listening hears you, goes to your website, and hopefully follows you when you hit the road. And you let us know. When you let us know, we'll pump it out that with all your social media. We are so grateful for you, Brian, and I'm grateful for Amanda connecting us, and I'm grateful for Amanda with all she's done for you. And I'm grateful for everything you are doing to help these kids. And I mean, God bless you. I just think the work you're doing is so needed and so beautiful. And I'm so grateful for you sharing your story with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest, Brian Butler, about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think Brian's comment about there's always a way forward, even in dark times, was so inspiring and true. To learn more about modern day heroes like Brian, or if you'd just like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared this with your friends and family. And don't forget to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Remember that together we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. See you next week.